Bore da, everybody. I nearly wished everybody good afternoon. I'm wishing the day away. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's have a look. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're just letting everybody get into the room and join us now. Here we go, and we've got some slides as well. Bore da, everybody. Thank you for coming along. This is a CDPS webinar hosted and in collaboration with our friends in what I previously knew as CDEI that have recently rebranded to the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit. Correct me if I'm wrong, Felicity, Liz. If I slip, by all means, give me a nudge throughout this. I'm used to referring to you in your previous guys. This is an exciting one for us because it's one of our new guidance bits of guidance that we're pointing to here at CDPS. So we're just going to let a few more people come into the room and we'll be able to give a bit of a deeper dive. Bit quiet. I don't normally get that one, Pete, but I can shout a bit more and pull this a bit closer. I'm in our lovely office today as well, in Spark in Cardiff, and it's just about to stop raining, so I can see out the windows as well. Not to worry, Danny. No background noise coming through, and I know Josh will be hot on anybody that's breathing down the mic. We'll mute everybody. No embarrassing dog noises in the background or doorbells. For Adele, Rebecca, I'll be going through Newport on the train later. I'll give you a wave as I go through. How are we looking for numbers, Mike? What time are we on? Should we start to kick off?
Yeah, I think we go for it, Jack.
Yeah. So as I've said a few times, thank you very much for joining today. This is one in a series of webinars that us here in CDPS are hosting. We've got along with us today the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit, previously CDEI, and they are giving us an overview of something that you may have heard me or somebody in the wider ecosystem here in Wales talk about, the Algorithmic Transparency Reporting Standard, and wider the kind of trust and transparency when using algorithmic tools in the public sector. It is a bit of UK focused guidance, and it's something that we here in CDPS and the rest of the CDO network have looked at and kind of pulled over, and we think it's an excellent way of starting those conversations within your organizations if you're looking at algorithmic tools, and to actually apply and use as a method of standardizing the data that you make available to the public and increase that trust when you're using algorithms and automated decision making. So I'm going to hand over to Felicity and Liz today to give you a bit more of an update about that and some of the help and support that's available there as well.
Thanks so much, Jack, and really great to be here. Very much looking forward to having the chance to talk to you all. So yeah, I'm Felicity. I'm the Executive Director of what is now the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit. I'm still getting used to saying that. We were previously the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, which is just as much as a mouthful. But I think it's a really sort of important sort of name change, gives a really good indication of what we do. Basically, we are the bit of UK government. We sit in the Department for Science innovation and technology. We are the bit of the UK government that is trying to enable responsible innovation and adoption, really trying to help you to do that by creating the kind of guidance and tools that make that a bit easier. What we're going to dig into today is the work that we're doing around algorithmic transparency and how you can get involved with that. I am also joined on the call by the excellent Liz Adams, who leads our work on algorithmic transparency, and she will get into a bit of detail on that for you. But perhaps I will sort of start a bit with the context. We obviously talk a lot about slides. Aha, thrown by a lack of slides. Yeah, anyway, we're here to talk about building trust and transparency in the use of in the public sector. We're going to cover some of the fundamentals in terms of what it means to build responsible AI and provide a bit of an introduction into the Algorithmic Transparency Recording Standard, which has been developed specifically for use in the public sector. So it is really tailored to what it is that you're trying to do and your organisations are trying to achieve, and also how you communicate that with your range of stakeholders and the general public who are interested in your work. The standard was developed jointly by us at the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit and also the Cabinet Office, Central Data and Digital Office. So it is a recognised cross-government standard. It delivers on commitments made in the National Data Strategy and also the National AI Strategy. You may also have seen, if you are particularly eagle-eyed, that we've made some further commitments in the AI white paper response to make this standard a requirement across all central government bodies. Now, I should say that that requirement doesn't apply to Wales, but the standard is still really crucial in terms of making sure that we're developing algorithmic tools responsibly, building public trust. And I think, you know, it's a really, really good sort of ambition for all of your organisations to have to sort of use this tool. And for context, we have already been working closely with Mike Thomas, the head of AI policy in the Welsh Government, to support the rollout of the standard in Wales. And this has included the translation of the standard into Welsh. So hopefully that's a really important sort of way to make this more valuable and applicable to your stakeholders. So in terms of what we're going to talk about a bit today, we're going to talk sort of a bit in general about building responsible AI, why that matters. We'll get into detail. Again, talk at a sort of headline level about the model for responsible innovation, which is the sort of broad approach to how one might innovate with data and AI responsibly. Then talk specifically about transparency and the standard. So yeah, maybe if we just move on to the next slide, which is just setting a bit of context on this. And that's very much that we are seeing increased interest in AI, in case you hadn't noticed. You know, I think we, especially on this call, are all really aware that data, advanced analytics, AI have potentially huge and transformative potential. They're already changing our lives. They're already changing the society that we live in all sorts of different ways. And we've seen really quite fast advancements in the use of these tools across sectors, including healthcare, including in some aspects of public services as well. And in particular, since the launch of ChatGPT at the back end of 2023, we've really seen unprecedented public and media interest in large language models and generative AI. And what were relatively niche topics only a couple of years ago really are at the front and center of the public debate now. And the public has become more and more aware and more interested in how data-driven tools are being used, how decisions are being made about them, and what impact that has then on the services that they receive. So if we just pop onto the next slide. So I think this just gives you a bit of an indication of many of the news stories that are out there. And I think it is really worthwhile just sort of setting out that there is a huge opportunity here. AI and algorithmic tools do create enormous potential for our public services. They can make them more efficient. They can make them more effective in terms of delivering more individualized services. And you really have that sort of potential for a dual win in terms of the outputs are better and they're potentially less expensive to deliver as well. And of course, then there is a huge amount of interest in developing tools for use in the public sector. But in order to make these work in practice and to secure buy-in with our citizens, and to be seen as legitimate, to continue to have that right to practice, we do need to make sure that we get the foundations right. And, I think for me, this was really sort of brought home by everything we've seen with the Post Office and Horizon stories lately, that how important it is to make sure that we are thinking about the governance of how we are using technological tools and where people have right to redress. We absolutely need to think from day one about how we are building tools responsibly, building trust with our stakeholders, and looking for ways to share best practice on innovation. We're never going to avoid sort of every single issue, but we really need to make sure we're thinking through those risks in advance if we want to adopt these tools well. And that brings me on to the next slide, which is a little bit of an overview of the RTA's model for responsible innovation. So this is a piece of work that that the team has done, sort of indicates how we think about responsible innovation in data-driven technologies through frameworks that really try to emphasize principles such as transparency, accountability, fairness, and inclusivity. And we use this this framework to guide our discussions around the developments of tools and think about the interventions needed. So the outside ring is the sort of fundamentals, the principles that you really need to consider to innovate responsibly. Obviously, you will see transparency, which we're going to dig into in a little bit more detail, is one of those, but we think each of these is really important to consider. And the inside ring is the kind of conditions and the actions that you might need to take to ensure that high standards are met. And again, if this is actually something that you're sort of thinking about and would like to learn a bit more about, we are going to be sharing more on our model for responsible innovation later this year. But at the moment, this is very much the tool that we use to sort of explain and understand what responsible innovation looks like. So if I can just dig in now to transparency a little bit more. Back when RTA was founded as the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, we did a big bias review looking at some of the risks around algorithmic bias. And one of the key tools that we saw for addressing that was transparency. In addition, I think there are really big public expectations for greater algorithmic transparency. People want to understand where algorithms are being used, how they're making decisions about them, and in what context they're doing that. And you can see here from the stats that we've done through our public attitudes research. I really encourage you to take a look at that work. Actually, it's very interesting. That 78% of the public feel that it is important for there to be transparency about how their personal information is being shared. So really high number. And our research also indicates where people have confidence in the governance around algorithms and data, they're much more likely to trust those use cases, and they're much more likely then to share their data as a result. So we know algorithmic tools are being used. We know there's lots of interest in them. We know the sort of ministers and political leaders are sort of pushing for increased use, but we also know that we need to get this right, that the public cares about how we get this right. So I guess then the question is, how do we translate this need for transparency into action? I can just ping on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So I think the really important conclusion from this is that the solution to this is our algorithmic transparency recording standard. We know that it is very much one thing to say you should be transparent, and actually quite another to know how to do that. And I think that this was really demonstrated to us actually by some of the public engagement that we did around the development of the standard, and sort of initial engagement pointed to people wanting us to share really high volumes of information with them about the algorithms that they were using and how they were using them. But then when we sort of moved into focus group settings, we quite quickly realized that that was actually far too much information, and it's quite hard for people to understand. So what the standard does is breaks that information down into two tiers that are actually much more understandable to the general public. And then if people, for example, experts, want to dig into that in a bit more detail, there is more of that information more of that information available. Sorry, Liz, if you can just move on to the next slide. So yeah, this is very much about us putting principles into practice, and Standard gives you the tools to do that. As I say, it's co-developed with the general public. We tested this using deliberation. It's also a really world-leading standard. So it's been recognised by the OECD's Observatory of Public Sector Innovation, and in their case study library is a really good example of a sort of leading approach to algorithmic governance. It's also being piloted by the Estonian government. So this is an example of the UK leading the way ahead of Estonia, and I think just demonstrates actually why it's really worthwhile you in Wales, although this isn't going to be a requirement, thinking about how to use this tool, because it's a great way to lead the charge for algorithmic transparency, and demonstrate how the Welsh government can show some leadership on this particular issue. So before I kind of hand over to Liz on this, I think I will just finish by saying this is tried and tested in the public sector. We have been piloting it for a while now. We've already completed transparency records with police forces, with central government teams, with regulators and more. So we do have a good sense of sort of what works and what doesn't, and we're continuing to sort of iterate and improve this tool as we go along, and really want to make sure that this works for the public sector. The only way that this is a really effective tool is if it works for public sector and it works for the general public. So Liz, I'll hand over to you now. I think Liz is on mute.
Yeah, we're struggling with your sound there, Liz. It looks like she is off mute, but Liz, do you want to see if there's anything we can do with your sound there?
Is that working now?
Yes, that's working now.
Okay, great. I'm very sorry. I've had a few unexpected technical glitches this morning. I was in the middle of saying that it's really great to be here and lovely to see so much interest in this work, in building AI responsibly, and in the transparency work that I'm about to talk about. I'm Liz Adams, and I lead the program on algorithmic transparency at the RTA. Great. So I'll dive in a bit then. So what is the standard? We'll refer to it as the ATRS for shorthand, the Algorithmic Transparency Recording Standard. So the standard is designed to help public sector bodies provide information about their use of algorithmic tools in a really clear, accessible, and standardized format. We want to make it as easy as possible for citizens to understand how decisions about them are being made, and allow public sector bodies to do that in a proactive, open, and accessible way. So the standard is most relevant for tools in two categories, either ones that have a significant influence on a decision-making process, and that's with either direct or indirect public effect. So an example of that might be a machine learning algorithm that provides members of the public with a score or triaging to help government departments determine the eligibility for benefits, for example. Or tools which directly impact on the general public, or they come into direct contact with. So for example, a chatbot on a website, which members of the public can ask questions to, and perhaps understand some of the services that they're being provided locally. We're deliberately not super specific about the kinds of technology that needs to kind of underpin these systems. It's really about the use cases and how things are being used in practice. But some of the types of tech that may be included, things like machine learning, expert or rules-based systems, large language models and generative AI, neural nets, and other forms of kind of complex statistical analysis or data analytics. So the next slide then, how is the standard structured? So we have a two-tier structure, and this came out of the deep co-design work we did with members of the public to understand what would members of the public find useful, and important to understand about how the public sector uses algorithms and how are they best like this presented. So tier 1 includes a short summary. So that's kind of how the tool is being used, why it's being used, and perhaps where they can go for more information, like a website or an email address. That's designed to be really accessible, that any member of the public would be able to understand, consume, and get an understanding of kind of what the tool in question is and how it's working. The second tier then is a bit more detail. And what we heard from members of the public when we did our engagement was that they may not look into all of this detail, but they felt it was really important that it was available to be scrutinized by people with more expertise. So that second tier then has 5 different sections. The first is organization and the owner and responsibility. So that includes information about the organization, the team, the SRO, any external suppliers where they're involved. The second section is a description of the algorithmic tool. So a bit on what it was designed for, what its key benefits are, what it's expected to deliver. That kind of value for money case. What was the previous processes? What other alternatives were considered? The third section is on the decision-making process. So this is around the role of the tool, perhaps in a wider decision-making process, the roles of humans in the loop, what training is provided to those people using the algorithmic tool, and any appeals processes or reviews processes. Section 4 is the more technical of these, and we think both about the kind of architecture of the tool that's been developed and the data that's being used both to train the model and also that it's being deployed on. So what information is it kind of using to make decisions? So we look for information about the type of model, how regularly it's maintained, how high performing and accurate it is, things around system architecture, the data sets that it uses, and that's both in training and deployment. And then the final section is impact assessments and risk mitigation. So we ask people to include information about risk assessments that have been undertaken already. So those might be DPIAs, data protection impact assessments, equality impact assessments, any other impact assessments, and then also create a list of any key risks that may be posed by the tool and mitigating factors that have been taken into consideration. Great. So 3 really key elements here. So transparency is an absolutely critical principle of any ethical and responsible AI framework, and it was featured in and forms a key part of the white paper on AI governance for the UK. So transparency builds trust. It allows that engagement with the public, and it also introduces a level of accountability. But there's a lot more to it than that. As kind of completing a transparency record also kind of promotes responsible development of those tools. It allows you to understand the kinds of questions you need to be asking early on in building and procuring or identifying algorithmic tools, and then help you to mitigate any negative impacts. So it's really about kind of building those foundations, the building blocks needed for building responsible tools. And there's also a really key part around enabling innovation. We found those people using the Algorithmic Transparency Recording Standard use it to communicate potentially with senior leaders. This is a way of condensing information, articulating the purpose and the functioning of a tool, and so kind of helpful internally to communicate across boundaries. But also really good examples of good practice. There's so much fantastic innovation that goes on in the UK public sector, and being able to proactively communicate that, learn from one another and understand what's going on across public sector is hugely, hugely valuable. So I've just got a couple of case studies now. These are examples of tools and teams that have previously completed transparency records. They are available on our gov.uk page, so you can go and read more about them if you're interested. But just to give you a bit of a sense of the types of things that are out there that people are developing. So the first one is the Q-COVID algorithm. This was an algorithm that was developed during the kind of high period of the coronavirus, and it was to help predict the likelihood of severe illness or death from COVID. So it took into account a number of factors about individuals and used these in combination to kind of predict and help those in the medical profession understand how at risk patients were of severe illness or death. And the second one, another really interesting example, was a exploratory analysis conducted by West Midlands Police. And the idea was to help understand the impact of different factors in investigations on the success or failure of those investigations on rape and serial sexual offences. So they wanted to understand what factors, like number of officers, like response time, etc., how those different factors contributed to successful prosecutions. So this then allowed them to understand that and adapt accordingly to kind of target this area as best they could. There's here are a few testimonies going back to a few of the things I've mentioned already around the use and the value people see in using the Algorithmic Transparency Recording Standard. So people feeling that they can kind of communicate much better, and it forces them to like open up and talk across an organization, understand how potentially kind of a policy and operational team and a tech team work together and to produce this information for the transparency record. It's also useful as a kind of indicative list of things to consider in development of responsible tech. So how do you use the standard? All the information you will need is available publicly and freely on gov.uk. We are updating in the next few weeks to make the user experience even easier than it is at the moment. But there are three key parts, and this won't change. There is the Algorithmic Transparency Recording Standard template. So this includes all of the fields of information that are in the standard, and it's an easy way for you to complete the information that's needed by typing it in to against the relevant fields. And once all of those are complete, you will have a finished Algorithmic Transparency Recording Standard record. Sorry. The second part is the guidance. So this goes into detail on all of the different fields about what information is required, what sorts of information you should or maybe shouldn't include, word counts, any support that you may think about setting up in terms of how to get it cleared internally. So that's all available alongside the standard. And then finally, we have a repository of published records. So those people who have completed a record and published it, they're all available on our central repository so that citizens, members of the public can go on and see what types of tools are out there and how they might be impacted by them. Whilst all of this is all out there, we are more than happy to guide you through the process, offer whatever support we can. We'll provide contact details on the last slide, but please also do feel free to go through colleagues on this call or Mike. We're always very open to further conversations and to support you in that process, thinking about any challenges or barriers that you may come across in that transparency journey. So our final slide then on our next steps. So looking back a little bit, the ATRS was endorsed by the DSA, the Data Standards Authority, which is a central government body which looks at guidance and standards that should be used across the UK public sector. That was back in 2022. There's clearly really strong interest in responsible AI adoption at the moment. And as Felicity mentioned at the start, we also announced that the standard will become mandatory for central government bodies in the UK over the next year. Now, that doesn't apply to Wales, to be clear, but we think that there's such strong evidence for the value of this standard. we'd like to see it become an expectation that people who are using and developing algorithmic tools are using the standard routinely. We are now running cohorts for teams across the public sector. So this means you'll be grouped with other similar teams and organizations to go through the process of completing transparency records. So if you'd like to be part of this, please do get in touch. And there'll be a real kind of strong support network there, and the opportunity to meet other people developing similar things in your space. And we are finally also building on existing work to understand and set out exemptions. So we know, for example, that there'll be clear reasons not to include some kinds of information or records about certain types of things, for example, in the national security space. And so we'll come out with that, with further updates on those parts in due course. That's the end of my piece. On the screen there is our contact details, our team's contact details if you'd like to get in touch. But it was great being able to talk to you all. And Felicity, I'll pass back to you if there's anything else you'd like to add.
Thanks, Liz. Not much more to add to that. I think you've given a really great overview there, but just I guess to bring this back together, that this work is a really key example of how we translate some of those principles on digital ethics into practice. And I think helps give you a really meaningful tool to develop and improve. We are inviting you now to get on board and engage and really be leading organisations when it comes to algorithmic transparency. As I said at the start, I think this is a bit of an opportunity actually for the Welsh Public Sector to lead the charge on algorithmic transparency. Yes, it is becoming a requirement in central government in England, but I think your public sector is clearly really interested in this. We've translated the standard into Welsh, and I think just a really nice chance to demonstrate the sort of forward-thinking nature of the Welsh administration. And you know, on the sort of other side of this, we do know that complying with standards like this takes work. It takes a lot of consideration. I've seen some questions coming in, which hopefully we can start to answer today. We think that this is really worth your while in terms of building trust, in terms of getting in on this right at the start, because it's going to help you. You know, if you build these strong governance foundations, it's going to help you to put in place everything else that you want to do to build on your ambitions around data and AI. But yeah, we're here to help. If you're building, if you're deploying, if you're using algorithmic tools in your organization, consider becoming part of this movement. Happy to answer questions that you have and help you all to be leaders on AI and algorithmic transparency.
I just wanted to jump in there as well and thank both Liz and Felicity for that overview. Obviously, I'm a bit more familiar with this, and I'm familiar with the Welsh public sector as well as a whole with AI. I know that people are engaged, people are passionate about it, and I know for a fact that people care about transparency and doing the right thing here. So I do think that we've got an opportunity to kind of come together. I see that CDPS is going to be a big part of that, and rather than, you know, obviously, you're more than welcome to go directly to the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit, but CDPS is here as well to try and connect you within Wales so we can kind of come together, work together, share what we all think within the Welsh public sector and engage with the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit as a group as well as individually. So we're here for that support. We've got that better idea of the Welsh context because of our familiarity with what we're doing internally, as well as the digital transformation that's going on within Wales as well. So I think we've got the two sides of the coin here to work really well. We've got that kind of expertise and the kind of really good tool that's been designed in collaboration with the public and has that real, it has a depth of expertise to it, but we also have the kind of context from CDPS and the people who are joining us here in the room today. So I do think we have a few questions, Mike. I don't know which order you want to go through. I know we had somebody that was ready to kind of jump on screen and ask a question as well. So I think that was it Carmine or?
Yeah, I think we have Carmen. If Carmen was to come in and ask a question to Liz and Felicity.
Hi, Charmaine, sorry.
Charmaine, sorry, Charmaine.
No, so I'm from Social Care Wales, and I'm actually working on a pilot project at the moment to develop a chatbot that offers people information about qualifications and how they might be relevant to work in the care sector in Wales. I've already started completing the transparency template. I was also looking at the data ethics framework, and I know that's a bit older, and they do seem to overlap, although this is obviously much more concentrated on the AI aspect. Would you still need to complete both of them, as they both seem to cover quite a lot of similar areas? I'm not sure if this supersedes that at all.
Shall I come in, Felicity? Let me know if you can't hear me, because my speakers keep changing for some reason. Yeah, that's a great question, Charmaine. And I think we may be speaking as well in the next couple of weeks about your specific record, which is really exciting. So the way that I'd see it is the transparency standard is designed for kind of the endpoint when things are in deployment to communicate with the general public about how they're being used. The data ethics framework was designed for a much earlier stage, just to kind of prompt and start thinking about some of the questions. There is a huge amount of overlap because the questions, the questions they're trying to get at are very similar effectively. But I think I'd potentially use them slightly in tandem. But certainly the transparency standard is, of course, kind of a newer product, potentially a bit more comprehensive. And so that's a great place to start. And then perhaps you could use the data ethics framework for any supplementary things if needed. But hopefully that explains why they both exist. There's like slightly different points in the life cycle with slightly different purposes. But as I've said, I think we're already speaking, Charmaine, but I'm really happy to have those conversations with people as well and kind of talk through some of this directly.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up a little bit there as well as just from my own experience of having conversations with people and my own thoughts looking at this, the reporting standard, thinking from when I've been in the position of filling these kind of things in. The way I kind of developed my understanding of it was that the reporting standard is a collection of things, a lot of things that are already ongoing, impact assessments that are already expected to go ahead, good governance processes that will already be going ahead as well. So it isn't kind of like another process or another tool that's kind of being kind of burdened almost on different organizations. It's a way to collect all of that other good work with a bit more specific focus on this new area, as it were.
Jack, you've clearly got the lines to take. No, and I think that's a really important point, actually. And on all of this, this was a collaboration between RTA and the Cabinet Office, Central Data Digital Office. This is very deliberately designed to work alongside things. Of course, other frameworks have come out in the past, and we're always sort of thinking about how we interact. But we are very much trying to make this something that aligns with existing tools where we can, and work with you where there are those issues and challenges that arise.
Perfect. Thank you. Mike, have you picked out the next question for us?
Yeah, we've got a question from, I think, John, which came earlier on in the conversation. He said, are you taking the EU Artificial Intelligence Act into account with your work on defining this guidance?
Shall I do that one, Liz? I mean, I think basically the answer to this is that this is a UK standard, and obviously, like, we're quite interested in what's happening in the EU, but this is designed to comply with the UK's current regulations and where the UK wants to go, rather than the other way around.
Yeah, just to add, this is not this is not meant to sit on the same level as legislation or regulation in this space. It's about transparency to the public, from public sector in particular. I will say that many other European states are thinking about very similar things. The Dutch have a very similar repository that's nationwide and mandatory, that's already in place, and the Estonians are, as we've said, piloting our standard. So this very much lines up with best practice in the space, and as Felicity mentioned at the start, has been recognised really as kind of global best practice. So we're certainly meeting and exceeding the best standards that are out there already.
And I think, just relatedly, because I spotted that there was a question in the chat about how this relates to the private sector as well. So this is
I've got David. I've got David to come in here, actually, because I think he asked that question. Yeah, so if I bring in David there, Felicity, so I don't interrupt you.
It's all right.
David, do you want to come in and ask your question specific to that?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, David.
Okay, great. Yeah, so yeah, I was just curious as to how this relate, obviously with the examples we've talked around teams building their own tools, but we're an organization that work with more evaluation of private sector's tools that might then be used in the public sector. So yeah, I was just curious how it would apply in that scenario and whether there's anything that's different around how it would need to be used.
Yes, I think there's probably. Oh, there we go. I think there's probably a few parts to that question. So this the standard isn't itself specifically designed for private sector bodies. So we wouldn't expect private sector bodies to report on the Algorithmic Transparency Recording Standard. However, what we have found is actually quite a number of private sector bodies who, like organizations who want to lead the way and want to demonstrate to their customers that they are leading, are either using this as a template or building their own approaches on the basis of this. And we've actually seen that happen globally. So some UK companies, but some around the world have looked at this and sort of said, actually, that's a way that I can report on my algorithms. I think for your specific question, where you are deploying algorithms that you have brought in externally, I think we would encourage you to go through this process. But the other thing to make you aware of is one of the other pieces of work that we're doing at Responsible Technology Adoption Unit at the moment is a piece of work called AI Management Essentials. That's also noted in the white paper response. And this is going to be a governance tool that works with the private sector and is a standard that they will have to reach in terms of their AI tools in order to sort of sell into certain public sector frameworks. So we're working on that at the moment. We're consulting on that at the moment, but I think across the piece, we probably are answering that. Liz, I don't know if there's anything more specific on ATRS that you wanted to say.
Sure, thanks, Lucy. I mean, mostly to echo what you've just said, David, when we've had, and we've had quite a few teams that have procured tools and then either kind of are directly deploying them or are then fine-tuning pre-deployment. They work with the supplier to get the information that's needed in order to complete a transparency record. So there is that kind of public-private sector interaction. I will say we've done a huge amount of testing and piloting of the standard and the process needed to complete it. And we've done our very best to address concerns around kind of proprietary and IP issues. And what we found is actually the kind of information that we're asking for is generally acceptable to private sector suppliers. There may be instances where that's tricky. And again, we're happy to work with you through those, but we have kind of tried and tested that piece and we're relatively confident where we've ended up.
Okay.
Just a bit of a follow on the back of that, and seeing Sophie's add a bit of a kind of follow-up question to David there as well. I think really coming together as a sector and in Wales and as the rest of the UK, we can start to hold those private bodies to account as well. I think we can feel a bit separate at times, and we might feel like we can't ask those questions about redress, about these kind of explainability questions, but ultimately we are accountable to the people that we are providing services to not have black box AI, to not have systems or tools in place where we can't explain why those decisions have been made. And independently, we might all have that feeling, but not have the enough of a voice. But by coming together with tools like this and having a kind of unified, standardized way of reporting them, it means that we're all on the same page and we can say, this is what we expect, this is what we need, and this is what you'll have to give us to get these to be successful in tender processes and the like. So this is the start of that journey. I hope that answers both of your questions.
Great. Ready for me to roll into the next question? There's a few more coming in. So yeah, we had a question in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee, but they asked, how do we raise awareness of tier 1 to those offline low digital skills / confidence? There are positives for AI algorithmic tools, but we need all citizens to understand, remove the trust and fear barriers. An online approach to make people aware alone doesn't go far enough.
Sure. I'll do what I can and then feel free to come in. So My response to this is I think it's a hugely important to start with, and the whole the reason behind having these two tiers was that tier 1 would be provided to people as proactively as possible. And obviously from our perspective we can create this like centralized repository, but it's really kind of reliant on the people creating the tools to get information to people through the channels that where those people will be interacting with those tools, if that makes sense. So it really depends on the context. What is the tool doing? If it's a chatbot tool, then at the point that someone's interacting with the chatbot, if it's a tool, for example, in a smart city where say there's something installed in a park, then people have put up signs around the park to inform people of what's going on. So I think it's really about communicating with people through the channels that are most effective and impactful and important for the specific use of that tool, and that's really critical. So what we are trying to do is kind of create this centralized set of resources that people can rely on, and then there's a huge amount of work out there, and perhaps I can share some resources after this of organizations that are thinking about like that direct communication, and depending on exactly what kind of tools being used, what's the best way of getting information to the people that need it.
Great. Anything to add there, Felicity or Jack? Yeah.
I've just got like one little thing as well, is that I think again, like most things, what we talk about in CDPS comes back to here is digital inclusion. It's one thing making that information available offline to people who don't use it there, and Liz is exactly right when she says that if you're working in a space, use a channel that reaches that space better. But it's also about bringing people up and being able to have them access that information and be able to engage with everything in the space as well. There is something to be said for as well, like it's not enough to rely on, but being out in the open and the majority of people being able to access that information, we look after each other. So yes, not everybody may be able to access or even know about the records that are there, but by being out in the open, it raises the standard a little bit rather than being able to rely on kind of things slipping underneath the radar almost, or relying on things being in a bit of a disused cabinet somewhere in the back of an office that you're pretty confident that nobody's going to be able to access.
Yeah, and sorry, I said I didn't have a point, but it just kind of made me think that I think, you know, this gives you a baseline, right? That we put the information out there. This is a way to share it, but it is a baseline. And if you want to go further, if you are successfully sharing this with your stakeholders, I think we'd really also love to hear how people are doing that and what works in different contexts, because you know this is genuinely leading world leading way of communicating how we're using these tools. Other nations are copying us. That's really exciting. We'd like to keep leading the way on this. So you know, if you're thinking I would like to use this, but I'd actually like to communicate it better, firstly, that definitely let us know and let us know what's working and what isn't, because we can sort of embed that into some of the longer term processes around what we do too, because that public engagement piece is absolutely part of this.
Brilliant. We've a couple more questions come in the Q&A still. So we've got an Ailing has asked, would you recommend using the standard if a product is going into private beta pilot with the public, or just if it's being launched as a live product?
Thanks for that. Would you recommend if standards going into a private beta? So what I'd recommend is that you look at the standard as early as possible and think about the questions in it, and the kinds of information that are required, because really in that kind of early development stage, there's some really helpful pointers there about what kinds of information, what kind of things you should be thinking about essentially. So I'd look to start either trying to complete or at least understanding how you might complete all of those fields as early as possible. I think at the point of making it public would probably be kind of public beta or live, given how many tools kind of essentially live at the point of public beta. That certainly makes sense to us, and perhaps at private beta you could share it with those people that are participating, that have access to it, and that may be also a good moment to trial how it lands with them and if they understand it. So I think essentially it's about getting information to people that are going to be impacted by a tool. And so think through the specifics of kind of what you're doing and who might need to have that information. I just think about it like super practically. And of course, as ever, we're happy to chat that through if helpful.
I also think about this in terms of kind of like planning as a tool for yourself. It's not just about the end goal of getting that kind of report out there, but this is a journey that you're going to go on. So rather than reaching the end of a project and looking back and seeing gaps, using it at the very start and saying, right, this is a checklist of the things that we're going to have to do. It means that the governance of that project all the way through doesn't have those kind of slip-ups, or it's like less likely to have the things that people would expect to see at the end of it as well. So even if you are going into a private beta, perhaps consider looking at it as a kind of framework for, do I have the right things in place, even if we aren't going to go public with it and publish it anywhere.
Yeah, and this has absolutely been the feedback actually that we got from some of the earlier pilots of this, that organisations that had sort of tried out using the tools were finding wider benefits from doing that it was helping them to have better conversations about their data ethics frameworks, who owned specific data sets, who owned specific risks, and really think about that in a slightly more holistic way as well. So I think that there are sort of wider benefits for your organisation to engaging with this sooner.
Fantastic. An Imogen, sorry, I got croaky now. An Imogen Sheriff has asked, hi, how do algorithms based on historical data not further, with interest, existing unconscious bias in the public sector? So how do algorithms based on historical data not further existing unconscious bias in the public sector?
I'm happy to sort of start on that one, but I think, quite honestly, I think that's a big part of the reason that the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit exists. That is a big and complex question, and it is a massive risk when you are implementing algorithms. We've seen lots of examples of where algorithms have been deployed, and they do exactly that. There's the famous ones around sort of Amazon using sort of previous CVs and finding that people who had like women's netball team on their CV didn't get jobs. I think the important thing is Amazon stopped using that tool, and actually that's a really important note that they stopped using it, because it meant that even if it happened a bit late, their governance was working, and I do think that governance is a really key part of this. You cannot just deploy these tools blindly. You do have to think about the risks associated with how you're going to use them. So obviously transparency is one of those tools, but I think all of the other aspects that sort of sit around the wheel on the model for responsible innovation are really sort of important to consider. And if you are looking at sort of deploying specific tools, we can help and we can sort of run you through the model. Specifically actually on that recruitment example that I mentioned, a couple of years ago now, we did some work with the Recruitment Employers Confederation to produce guidance on how you might use those tools, because we know that recruitment is one of the areas where there are quite a lot of risks around the use of algorithms, but also lots of opportunities around increasing diversity of hires, and sort of speeding recruitment up, improving the candidate experience. So we've written some really quite detailed guidance with that sector, and sneak peek. It's not quite a sneak peek, but we're actually refreshing that guidance so it will apply to all sectors, not just the recruitment sector, and make it a little bit easier to use. And we're doing some sort of testing with a number of business organisations at the moment, so that will be coming out soon. And I guess if you are sort of thinking about other use cases and they're particularly risky, it's always really helpful for us to know. We did this particular piece of work on recruitment, as I say, because we identified it as one of the riskiest areas for entrenching bias in algorithmic uses, but we know that there are others. And it's very helpful for us to understand actually how adoption of AI is and data-driven products is evolving in the public sector and more widely, so we can think about where we best target the tools and the guidance that we're developing.
I've got a small thing to add on that as well. It'd be remiss of me, it's a CDPS webinar, we've got to bang the drum here, but we're always user-led. I think it's really good to be conscious of where these biases exist in historical data, but Felicity, you mentioned it, like being data driven in products. I think that's where the importance of being user focused comes in. That's where the importance of your user centered design, your user research comes in as well. So you can bring what your assumptions are to the table with the people who are actually going to be using the products and then iterate from there. But I think it's much better to be daunted by the historical inaccuracies or biases in your data because you're seeing them. If you weren't looking at that or weren't thinking about that, you might miss them. But it's never going to be done. We're biased as a society. We're biased as people. Our data is always going to be biased in a little bit. So we've just got to do what we can along the way and put in. It adds that important for those routes to redress. We're going to get things wrong, but we need to be able to fix them as they go along and change and respond to them based on ourselves and the data and what people need as well.
Brilliant. I think we've got, I'm sorry if we're not going to get through all the questions. We will make sure that we pick up, a couple of the ones that have been left, unfortunately. But we've got one here, I think it's a nice one to finish on, from Matt McCarthy. It says, does the standard have a role in ensuring the public sector organisations share learning when AI-based tools fail or cause harm? Transparency is important when building with AI, but is even more vital if things go wrong.
Liz, do you want to do that one?
Yeah, no, I can do. So absolutely. And reason that we've sort of gone through the many reasons that transparency is so valuable, but being able to share learnings, both positive and negative, is a really crucial part of that. We'd like to think that using the standard and thinking through carefully the fields and the questions that it asks will prompt some of the key issues that we often see around responsible development of AI. But absolutely, there may still be instances where things don't go quite right, and being able to share information about that, having kind of tried to build trust and communicate that proactively, I think puts people in a better place to deal up front with some of those issues that may arise, and to communicate kind of openly with their stakeholders in the communities that they work for and with. But hopefully that answers the question. But I think that kind of that transparency, openness, and honestness is such a key part of building things that really do work and being able to talk about the things that don't.
I'm also going to be a little bit shameless here and plug our upcoming community of practice that we're developing with AI. A few people will have already responded to a bit of research and interviews that we did at the back end of last year and the start of this year. We're hearing loud and clear that people do want to share this information in Wales, and that different public sector organisations in Wales are using and looking at using algorithms, automation, AI, and that kind of smaller group, not to be insular about it, but it's a kind of like, there's a bit of psychological safety there. That's what we're looking to kind of build in that kind of within Wales and the specific kind of needs within Wales, where it goes right, where it goes wrong, and where we can learn from each other. We do have a steering group that's already been set up for that. So the community of practices, it will be weeks time. So I'd encourage anybody to get in touch with us if they're interested in becoming part of that group or sharing that learning or anything that goes right and wrong. And we can kind of provide that bit of a safety net. We're quite good at that here at CDPS, I like to think.
Yeah, and we couldn't bring Bob Griffiths in, unfortunately, but he asked a question around how AI works with the Welsh language. But I think that's something which will definitely be addressed, Jack, wouldn't it, in the communities of practice, if Rob is interested, and potentially a future webinar as well, looking at that, because I think that's definitely something in the context of Wales that is very important. Brilliant. Well, Jack, I'll pass to you to wrap up. I'm just going to put on screen a link to our feedback survey. So if you could just talk through people sort of what kind of questions we'd like to ask and wrap the session up, that'd be great.
Yeah, we really like using Menti here. We have a few standard questions about how you found the day, how you found the webinar, how easy it was to access the kind of questions, what you thought of the content, and where you thought that there could be a little bit more of a follow-up, or perhaps, we raised one there, subsequent sessions, and what we can go into a bit more detail on, what your main takeaways were. And if you've got any interest in that community practice coming up, that Menti will have an opportunity to kind of register as well. So if you provide a bit of information, we'll make sure that you're on the list. And I can see that Ed is in the chat as well, giving more of a detail on that community of practice. So there is a QR code or there's normally there's a number code as well that you can go to menti.com. and you can give us a bit of direct feedback from this. We respond to it, we flex and change, and hopefully these webinars have got better and better in response to them. If there's anything more you'd like to see or anything you need a bit more support on, I know that the folks from the Responsible Technology Adoption Unit are more than happy to help us here in CDPS as well. If you want to ask a few more questions, it's a open invite. Get in touch with us. As I said, this is part of a series of webinars that we've had so far. I can't count. I think we're on to, I think there's 4 webinars there and a show and tell feedback from the discovery that we did, asking people about the current use of automation and AI that I mentioned. This webinar has been recorded today, so if you thought it was useful and somebody in your organization or another organization would benefit from watching it back, I'd encourage you to do so. We're getting some really good hits on those. I know it shouldn't be as important, but seeing 2.6k views, it's kind of satisfying. So I'd encourage everybody to share those along and to get in touch with us. And that just leaves me saying thank you. Thank you very much for everybody to come today. Thank you very much for people who asked questions in the chat or came on voice. I know it can be a little bit daunting. I should know I'm sat here. And thank you very much to Liz and Felicity. I know you must be speaking about this all the time and people must really, you must have these questions down to a T now. But thank you very much for your time, everybody. We'll be in touch soon.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Has it stopped yet? That was a good one. Oh, you've gone on. You've